It is 1 o'clock on a Tuesday. We welcome you to a special edition of the AXA Legislative Lunch Break, along with Edgar Zazwata, AXA's Senior Director of Policy and Governmental Relations. I'm Naj Alikhan, AXA's Senior Director of Marketing and Communications. Welcome. So happy to have you here on a Tuesday. We've got a very, very important show for you today. Go ahead and jump on our chat. Say hello. Let us know where you're watching from. We expect to have a number of new viewers today from our other Education Coalition organizations who wanted to take part in this discussion on independent study. Edgar, how are you? You and I aren't normally here on a Tuesday in these seats.
Yeah, let's see how this works on a Tuesday. Let's see if our technology works on Tuesdays. Let's see if we remember how to ask questions. And I think we've done maybe one or two Tuesday shows. It's been these last 18 months are a blur, but I think that, you know, we had a couple of days where we had to jump on random days. It worked out. So I'm excited. This is a big week in terms of, not maybe excited isn't the right word, because I know what our members are feeling, as I've been saying for the last number of weeks, but I take some solace that we're able to get some folks in here to today, from the member perspective, later in the week, you know, maybe give a little bit of some of the answers, especially on the public health side. So it's going to be a big week.
It is going to be a big week. Want to say hello to Philip and Angela Shell. Gary Reller is here. Richard Wiersma is here. I want to point out, I don't believe I've met Ellen Wheeler, but Ellen is becoming one of my favorite members because she is always like, between her and Gary and Angela, it's one of those three are the first ones on the chat. I have a feeling her message is always like typed and ready to go. So the second that we start, she hits it and we're good to go.
I love that. I get excited the second I see the messages pop up, right? It's our warning that, all right, we're going to get this started here.
Yeah, exactly. Hey, I want to run through a couple of news headlines for you. Then we'll dive into this topic of independent study, because there's a lot to it. A lot of things that we have to discuss because it is an important advocacy week. Want to let you know that the governor did a news conference a few hours ago to update the state on the vaccinations. As reported from the Sacramento Bee, more than 80% of Californians now 12 and older have received at least one COVID dose, part of the 47 million doses of the vaccine that have gone out. He acknowledges a 4.6% positivity rate and says, of course, there's still work to do, still challenges for minority groups with respect to accessibility. I mean, Edgar, those are good numbers, but, you know, as he acknowledges, there's still work to do. I mean, I would agree, especially with our minority groups.
Yeah, it's surreal actually listening to the governor here today over the last couple of days, because there's so much going on in our state, right? Like, it's almost that COVID has been the staple, right? We no matter what else is going on, we're still dealing with the pandemic. I mean, I have to say, yeah, just to take a moment, like, it's been surreal, and I know I've got caught up in the last couple of days just reading the headlines, looking at those very problematic images from northern part of our state, folks dealing with fires in the Lake Tahoe region, with the Caldor fire, the Dixie fire still causing a lot of challenges up here up north, obviously impacting schools, obviously impacting people's lives. So it's just there. It goes without saying, there's a lot of challenges right now on the COVID front, as you said, Naj. Good numbers. I mean, good numbers in terms of vaccinations, good numbers. I know that the state has continuously brought up how we're doing compared to others. Not to say that's the end all be all, because we still have our own challenges. But even that positivity rate, even if we're not declining rapidly, it's maybe even starting to stabilize those numbers. I think the big question, and what our folks are seeing firsthand, is what's the weeks to come going to mean, especially with so many kids being back in school. Now, the one thing I take a lot of solace in, despite, we're going to hear from our members, and I'm sure we're going to talk about quarantines, and I'm sure we're going to talk about the challenges. You know, the one thing that I've heard more than anything is that even despite us having to go through these steps, and yes, that there's COVID, and there's COVID in the community, and there's been COVID in the schools, but that most of that transmission hasn't been because of school, right? Yeah. And it just sounds like our members, our school leaders, our employees, our families are doing a good job of following those health guidelines. So even when there is COVID that's introduced into our school environment, it's not like it's causing these huge outbreaks. Without a doubt, there's been some isolated incidences, but all told, it seems like the protections are working as they're intended to do.
And I saw a comment from Scott Smith, the great communicator over at ABC Unified, talking about lunch break on a Tuesday. Scott, you don't have to rewatch the show tomorrow because we are going to be on tomorrow, 1 o'clock, our normally scheduled AXA legislative lunch break. Dr. Sohail Sood, the co-lead for the Safe Schools for All, he will be on the show tomorrow. Our guest, he's going to talk student vaccinations, positivity rates in schools, the campaign to inform and get educators vaccinated by the October deadline. That is our regularly scheduled AXA legislative lunch break. They're not letting us leave our seats tomorrow, Edgar. We are back in the seats at 1 o'clock for everybody. So looking forward to
quite a double dose, I have to say. Good. Our schedulers here, our team behind the scenes, independent study on one day, and having the top now, it's co-lead, the education expert on the public health side. I know our folks aren't going to be shy. I know our folks are going to come in with some questions tomorrow. So it should be quite a couple back-to-back days here.
If we have learned anything about our members, they are not shy. And that is definitely going to be a good thing. Let's go ahead and let's move to our topic today, Edgar, because it is an important one, independent study and that path of least disruption. I want to make a point, now have you maybe add to this before we bring our guests on. Across the street, inside the state capitol, the discussions you have, there seems to be some confusion about the difference between independent study and distance learning because they are two completely different things. And maybe there has not necessarily been that important pivot with the information piece of it across the street. We've had these conversations with them quite often, but can you just kind of maybe add a little context to why they may think distance learning is the same and it's not?
Yeah, I mean, I think you bring up a good point, Naj, and let's be transparent here. We're having this conversation for a number of reasons. I think it's always important to get our member story. And, we take pride. We're good advocates. My team is great. We have some great advocates on our team. The best way to do this advocacy is hear the story and the perspectives of our members. And that's why we thought today, let's highlight some of what's going on here in the early days of school. And I'm sure this is going to resonate with our members across the state. So I think just being able to put that, give some spotlight to that, I think is real important. Couple that with, we know our folks are challenged with just getting some technical answers to all this, right? The differences of what are your options to serve students, as we saw already in the chat, when a kid is quarantined. What options do we what do we have at our disposal? And I think we're going to try to do a little bit of that as well today, not just highlight the perspectives from the field, try to answer some questions. I know Yvonne on our team, who's been one of the experts in this area, is going to come in at the tail end and try to give a little bit of the clarity to your specific question. Yes, I think distance learning, and unfortunately, distance learning, rightly or wrongly, got a really bad rap in Sacramento, right? Mm-hmm. And I think there was this pendulum swung the other way where, no, we don't have distance learning this year. If you're going to serve a student virtually, if you will, it's got to be through this independent study mechanism to get ADA. And it gets really confusing about these virtual options. I know a lot of our parents, especially in communities where they saw it happen seamlessly. Okay, I'm not in school, or those that were doing hybrid programs, I was accessing my instruction from home. So there's a lot of questions of like, why aren't we doing it the same way? A lot of reasons why the legislature didn't want to go in that direction. I think we will all agree. I think we will unanimously agree that we all believe, AXA definitely believes this, that yes, let's make sure that in-person learning is the priority. I don't think we've ever wavered from that. I think what we're trying to come to terms with is, okay, is the system that we put in place, did it really take into account all of the potential issues that we're now seeing? And I think this is what we're going to hear from our members today about what had been some of those challenges given the framework that the state established.
And before we even bring our guests, and we'll do that in about 10 seconds, a reminder, our chat is open. If you have questions or you have comments about independent study, If you have some of your best practices, or maybe want to talk about some of the challenges you have faced, go ahead and put those into our comment section, our chat, and we'll certainly bring them into our conversation. Let's go ahead and bring in our valuable guests today. Ron Carruth is the superintendent from El Dorado Union High School District, and Deborah Cuban is superintendent from Ukiah Unified School District. Ron and Deborah, so great to have both of you on the show today. In addition to being the district leaders, you have also had the challenge of dealing with wildfires. Of course, Ron, you are in the midst of huge evacuations and all of that. So it's an honor to have both of you here. So let's talk about the start of this school year. How has it gone? Is the picture the same as the idea you had before the school year began? What's the experience like? Deborah, we'll have you start.
Well, we're in our third week this week of school, and I have to say it is so lovely seeing kids' faces on campus. It gives me lots of joy and energy to see our kids back in person, and I would say that joy and energy outweighs some of the challenges that we've had, because this is our third year, as you all know, of dealing with COVID. And we are experiencing some of the challenges there. But in general, it has been so great to have kids and staff back on campus in person.
And Ron, how's it gone for you so far?
Well, it's been an interesting start. I think all of us saw the numbers low in terms of the COVID case numbers low as we went across the summer. We're also really optimistic with the vaccine because so many of our staff have been vaccinated, as well as students. But then suddenly when we come into the school year, we see case numbers surging. In addition to that, we see the vaccine breakthroughs that are making everybody a bit nervous. And so that tension and angst that we thought all was behind us is really present as we start school this year. Similarly, we're in week 3, moving to week 4. And it's been pretty intense with the number of cases, the contact tracing, the shortage of staffing that I think we're all seeing. And then in the middle of that, we have this crazy wildfire that has on the eastern side of our district, 30 to 40% of our staff, as well as students and families, evacuated, not living at home now, going on 3 weeks. So it's a pretty intense time trying to manage a pandemic that doesn't mix well with a wildfire and evacuations.
Yeah.
Ron, Deb, I know aside from being district leaders, I know unfortunately it's the reality of your world, you both have been equipped in crisis management, right? I know, Deb, you've dealt with on the wildfire side, not to mention what you folks have been dealing with over the last 2 years. And Ron, you're living this real world. And in terms of expectation, you could all do all the planning. And I know the state did the planning, thought about, what the fall would look like. I like to joke here. We thought this is all going to be over June 15th, right? Like COVID is going to be over. We're going to go back to normal. We're seeing maybe it's not working out that way. But with that said, the Delta variant changed a lot of things, right? And it's sweeping through the state. Give us some sense of how that changed the dynamic in terms of your planning and also from the family side. Did the demand change in terms of not just independent study, but let's go even broader, just for virtual learning? And how have you had to pivot in the early weeks because of Delta variant? How has it changed things for you folks? We'll start with Ron this time.
Yeah, I think for us, everybody who's in the midst of COVID is now contact tracing, measuring 6 feet from student desks, trying to manage the late shift, if you will, to the modified quarantine that requires the testing, all in the midst of a staffing shortage. Substitutes, contact tracers, you can't hire the people you need to be able to adequately do all of this work. So you're constantly triaging, using your people to get the best outcome to keep your schools safe, but trying to do your best to comply and work with public health that doesn't have any resources really to assist us beyond guidance. So it's been a pretty wild ride. And I know that there are a lot of principals that are thinking, wow, I didn't realize I'd ever be measuring 6 feet and contact tracing to 9 o'clock at night on top of all my other duties. But many, many people in California are doing that just to be able to safely keep the doors open.
Deb, what's been your experience?
Yes, we had the same experience as Ron. Our numbers were looking pretty good this summer, and about 3 weeks ago, we started seeing the surge of the Delta variant, right about a little bit before school starting. And so I know that has people worried, but we really have a great safety plan in place. And so we're trying to be super transparent about communication. It is we have the same as Ron. We have the same staffing challenges. We've administered over 15,000 COVID tests since February, and trying to find an adequate number of people now that everybody's back in person to be able to administer those tests, that's definitely a challenge. But we are very committed to keeping our schools open, and are taking all the steps that we possibly can to make sure our schools are safe for kids so that we can keep our doors open. It is quite a challenge, though.
Hey, Ron, I'm going to ask you a follow-up because, we get some eyeballs on the show and people tune in, sometimes even outside of our members, to watch Naj here. And I think this is that you mentioned, the contact tracing. I know it's become such a big part of our vernacular. We've been talking about throughout the whole pandemic. But walk us through what that actually means in the school setting. And I was having a conversation earlier with somebody here in the Sacramento world, and we were having this very conversation of why this is so challenging, especially as it relates to school. So maybe if you could just give us a little more color, and what does that mean for your staff, and why is this becoming so difficult?
Yeah, either through public health or through a parent, we're notified that a student is tested positive for COVID. And if you're in the high school environment, that student has 6 classes. So you're going into those classrooms, you're looking at the teacher's seating charts. We're working really hard to make sure that students are in those spaces. You're measuring out 6 feet. Now suddenly you are making a series of phone calls, maybe 30 to 40 phone calls to each one of those families, just informing them that they have been in close proximity to a student who's tested positive. We then put them on a modified quarantine, which has us testing them on days 3 and days 5 and following up with parents to make sure that that's done. But you suddenly get like 100 parents that you're talking to. Now you have 200 additional touches for these tests to follow up with, as you now have 100 additional people that you're just testing out with contact tracing. Rapidly, the system falls apart when you're looking at numbers as high as we are. And so I think that's where I'm just in awe of our principals today in particular, because they are contact tracing, measuring, doing phone calls, working with public health, their nursing staff, their contact tracers, if they have them, in addition to trying to cover substitute classes during the day when we're short. Our principals are holding our systems together, and they are working so incredibly hard, but it is challenging, and at some point begins to become unsustainable as we have several weeks of this.
Hey, let me remind our viewers some of the questions that you are putting into our comment section, into our chat. We've got legislative advocate Yvonne Carrillo in the back, who's going to come onto the show a little bit later on. But he's in the back answering some of your technical questions on independent study. So if you have them, go ahead and drop those in. And one other thing, some of the benefit of the chat and comment section on this show is the opportunity to respond to some of the other viewers. So if you guys look and see a comment or a question in there, and maybe some experience you've had or a best practice that you've used could support any of our viewers, go ahead and jump that into the chat as well. Let me bring some clarity to this. Assembly Bill 130 and the late changes in the law, Deborah and Ron, created roadblocks for education leaders to have that continuity of learning. Tell us about your experiences with independent study this fall. What have been the challenges thus far for the district, for the teachers, for the students? Deborah, we'll have you start.
I'll just start by saying we're a district of 6,000 students, but my colleagues are serving between 35 in their district and 1,500. So our small school districts, my heart goes out to them to try and figure out how to make independent study work. But here in Ukiah, we have an independent study academy. Our numbers have doubled in the last week. We typically serve about 120 students through independent study. We are now this week up to 150. we've had to, amidst a staffing shortage, we've had to try and hire more staff. We've had to transfer staff from our comprehensive sites over to independent study. We've had to train these staff members in how to do independent study. So, in our small rural area, it's been a huge challenge for us. I think the other sticking point is that we are required to transfer, as if a family does no longer wants independent study, we're required to find them a spot back in the comprehensive setting within 5 school days. And for our smaller areas, that is incredibly hard from a staffing perspective. And then when you talk about continuity of instruction for students, if a student is going back and forth between independent study and, wow, we just had a little earthquake here. Talk about.
Did you really have an earthquake there, Deborah?
Yes, we did. Just a small little earthquake.
Edgar, that's a first on this show.
I did. Welcome to California. I mean, like, what else? I mean, I don't know what else to say.
I know, smoke, fire, pandemic,
Yeah.
downs, earthquake. We've got it all here in Ukiah, California. But anyway, it creates a lot of challenges for kids in terms of continuity of instruction. If you are moving back and forth between an independent study school and the comprehensive school, my big fear is that there's going to be some learning loss there for some students. We've also had students who struggled through distance learning or independent study. The two are very different. And we feel strongly that for most kids, the best place for them is in the in-person program, but we no longer have the option to deny service through independent study. So there are definitely a lot of challenges here that we're faced with, but the biggest one is how do you go from 124 kids to 250 within a week and find the staffing and the placement and serve them well?
Hey, Ron, before I have you respond to that, Stephen puts in the chat, is there still talk that AB 130 might be amended during the current session? Stephen, stay with us because we're going to talk about some important advocacy opportunities this week about AB 130 that we'd like you to get involved in. Ron, let me have you respond to that same question. What have the challenges been like with IS as far as the district, your parents, your staff, your students?
Yeah, I think probably very similar to what Deborah's faced. First of all, I view this as a time where we're managing anxiety in so many families. And as case numbers were low this summer, people increasingly felt comfortable about sending their students back to school full time. And as case numbers rise, families become increasingly uncomfortable or worried about other loved ones at home and potential exposure. And so they make that request in independent study. I think the difficulty for all of us is we're systems that generally operate off predictable stability. And so when we see sudden shifts, especially in a staffing shortage, it's very difficult to accommodate those needs. So in a similar sort of way, we see a reasonable shift to independent study. We planned for some of that, so we've been able to absorb at this point in time. But we also have some people who are on a waiting list that would like to get in, but they're okay with their current placement until we can hire someone and they understand our staffing shortages. So they're just certain realities that we're all trying to manage and making this work.
One of the things I love about the show, aside from us, trying to pretend we know things and, give information or trying to be a translator, one of my favorite components is, especially when we bring in our members, it's kind of sharing. And I see this not only with our guests, but also with the folks interacting with each other in the chat. And I think just gets people thinking because all of you are facing the same challenges. So we got a question from, I think it was Jonathan Drury, talking about that with the kids that are 100% virtual, that some of them are showing up. They're already seeing signs of disengagement. That obviously there's the attempts as prescribed per law of like what you have to do to try to engage them. Just wondering, like, any experience, what else can we do? And I don't know how much you folks have been dealing with this or how much your teams have, but any perspectives. I know we also got a question about best practices for STIS, for students' disabilities in quarantine. I know that's a question we get a lot. Maybe just some perspective on how you folks are dealing with these unique situations. We'll start with Deb this time.
Gosh, yes, we are fully engaged in trying to re-engage students who are not attending in the independent study program. We do, like probably most of you, we are doing continuous home visits. We are trying to counsel families back into the comprehensive program because, again, for a lot of these kiddos, that's the best place. I think some of our families are kind of waiting to see what's going to happen in the next couple of weeks with our COVID numbers, but we're doing everything that we can to serve these kids and get them engaged in school. So, but it is definitely a challenge. Special ed, serving kids with IEPs and our English learners through independent study and seeing those numbers rise is we could probably do a whole session on that. But it is we are definitely challenged. But we're doing everything that we can to get these kids engaged in school.
Ron, anything to add on that end?
Yeah, I think one thing that's different for us this fall than it was in the spring, and that is all the teachers that are in our distance learning team all selected to be here. So they are committed to helping students be successful. We started the year with all of our staff being trained in capturing kids' hearts. And so if you think about or know about that program, you've got these great contracts being done, even online with students, as we put a lot of energy and effort to build community, to build relationships and accountability on each side. So I think that's been a really effective kickoff for us in terms of the virtual world, because we don't want kids to feel isolated. But I think the comment about disengagement is so accurate. Our students are struggling, and it's really, really difficult to engage them in that format. So there's a lot of best practice that we could learn from each other in order to continually do this better.
We have heard about this confluence of three factors impacting independent study. There's obviously the Delta variant, there's the law, and then there's staffing shortages. And with complete transparency, Deborah came in here on two wheels to jump into our show today because she was actually out working with students today because of staff shortages. We need to keep our schools open. We need to keep our students getting that continuity of learning. But Deborah, I'll have you respond first. How are you managing this situation, those three factors?
We are trying to be incredibly creative. The action to allow teachers who've recently retired back in to serve our kids has been incredibly helpful. So we've been reaching out to retirees. We've also pulled in some additional retired administrators that we've been able to find to help us out with particular situations. So, but we definitely, I think we're down right now 17 paraprofessionals in our district. And that is definitely a challenge. We're down campus supervisors. We've had people get COVID and have to be quarantined, staff members. We had to cancel one of our bus routes this week because of staff absences. So it is definitely real. I cannot drive a bus. I do not have my bus driver's license, but all of us here at the district office are out in school sites trying to help with this situation.
And Ron?
Yeah, I think, the crisis brings out in general the best of everybody. We have teachers covering for teachers, counselors, administrators in the classroom. I think some of the key things that Deborah said, and we've had, support from CalSTRS as well as PERS to be able to bring in some of our retirees and waive some of the limitations that we've had for timelines in the past are all very helpful. We've sent out messages to our families just saying, listen, if you would like to help substitute, please let us know. We'll get you in the classroom and get you cleared. So we've had a lot of success with that. But the bottom line is we're just short of staff. With our fires in addition, we have had just a terrible time, even with all of those things covering the classrooms. And so our entire cabinet have been in substituting at different times over the course of the last few weeks. So I just think it's an acute shortage right now. Hopefully it's not a chronic one, but it's really the most complicated environment all of us have probably ever worked in, is what we're facing right now.
I'm going to touch on another question that we got, that this is another opportunity, even outside of our members, to do some education, because I think this is one of the big misconceptions about what's happening now as compared to last year. So I know this has come up from parents and parent groups, like, why aren't we just doing concurrent teaching? Why aren't we just doing what we call Zoom in the room or whatnot? So there's one, let me do a clarifying point, because I know I've heard this even amongst our members. There's no prohibition against doing concurrent learning and whatnot. Now that's the technical answer. What I'm going to ask both of you, and maybe even from your perspective, or you're both leaders in your respective regions, maybe just in talking to your colleagues, if you're hearing examples of this, about for students that are in quarantine, are you aware of LEAs using kind of the concurrent model for instruction while they're in quarantine? And if not, maybe giving your opinion on why is that a challenge? I know the answer. I think our folks know the answer, but maybe just a little bit why that's becoming more difficult than what it was last year. Ron, we'll start with you.
Yeah. So we did open full time last spring, and we realized with the quarantines that were happening, we were able to get cameras and microphones for every single one of our teachers to be able to live stream, to try to keep the students up to speed who were at home on quarantine. And then in addition, we're paying staff after school to connect with those students who couldn't be in their class because of quarantines, to make sure they don't fall behind. So both the Zooming, if you will, or listening into the classroom, as well as reaching out afterwards, are the two strategies we're putting in place to make sure students don't fall behind.
Deborah, anything to add on that one?
We have a few teachers doing that, but it is definitely optional. And we're not requiring it of our teachers.
Yeah.
It is a lot for them to manage. So anyway, we are not requiring it, although, with the pandemic, what we were doing last spring, and we were back in person last spring as well. All of our teachers are well versed in Google Classroom. That's what we use as our platform, and kids are getting connected that way with their teachers.
And I'll just add, editorial comment. I know from talking from our members around the state, I think in some LEAs, some districts, where maybe they wanted that to be an option, but frankly, you need the buy-in of your employees, right? And if your teachers are, just to your point, that they just don't feel they can handle that, or is the collective bargaining issue? In some district, they haven't been able to come to an agreement to use that as an option. So even though technically, yes, the law may allow it, there's the real component about that buy-in from the employees. And I think that's a real challenge around the state.
Let me, we're going to talk advocacy in a moment. Yvonne Carrillo is going to come on from the AXA Governmental Relations Department to talk about a very important advocacy effort for all of our viewers. Let me ask both of you, from an advocacy standpoint, you're virtually one-on-one, if you will, with a lawmaker discussing the challenges of independent study. Can you maybe summarize what you think needs to be done to make this better for students and to make this easier for districts to be able to deliver that continuity of learning and really, get rid of that that pathway that's causing so many challenges? Deb, we'll start with you.
I think a couple of pieces. One is the placement back into the regular program within 5 days. I think especially for smaller environments, that is really a challenge for us to be able to do within 5 days. There may not be space in a classroom. We have contract class size limits that are a challenge. So I think that timeline is unreasonable. I also feel that in terms of continuity of instruction, moving back and forth in between an independent study academy and the comprehensive program is not great for kids to be moving back and forth in between different schools. It is fraught with the potential for learning gaps to happen. And so I would completely focus on those two pieces. And I'll just say, despite we have an amazing staff. Our independent study staff has really stepped up to train our new people. Our administrators have stepped in everywhere possible. And despite all of that, it definitely, there are some changes that really need to happen.
And Ron, same question for you. You're one-on-one with lawmakers. What are you talking about as far as changes that need to be made?
Yeah, the first thing I really want to recognize is the work that Edgar and Yvonne are doing behind the scenes. They are like AB 130 warriors on our behalf. They've heard all of the concerns that we have. So the first thing I'm talking about is just the limitation of 15 days. We know that students are going to be out multiple quarantines if we have the Delta variant spreading within our community. So we need to address that and make it efficient and not bureaucratic. The second thing is when we put a student on temporary independent study from a quarantine, we have to be able to collect apportionment. Our staff is working to keep that student up to speed. So we need to make sure that we can actually collect the dollars for serving that student. The third one is kind of the credentialing flex a little bit that would be really helpful as we try to grapple with meeting the needs with all of our students in a staffing shortage. And then mainly, finally, this parent-student staff conference. The issue of all staff having to be present needs to be flexed a little bit so that we can practically get this done and not be caught up in bureaucratic details that harm our ability actually to move forward and put our energy and effort into students. So appreciate all the work that's being done on that, but those are key elements, and we have a moment in time where we can make a difference prior to the end of this legislative session to get this fixed.
Ron Caruth, Superintendent, El Dorado Union High School District, and Deborah Cuban, Superintendent, Ukiah Unified School District. Ron and Deborah, it's been an honor to have you on the show today. Thank you so much for your contributions. Have a great rest of the day.
Thank you so
guys.
much.
Great to be with you.
All right, Ron and Deborah. Edgar, let's go ahead and swing this to the advocacy piece right now. Ivan Carrillo, acts a legislative advocate. He's been behind the scenes answering so many of your questions. So, Ivan, let's pull you off of there and let's bring you here onto the show. Ivan, so good to have you. Let me ask this. You've been answering so many questions behind the scenes from our members, from our viewers. Give us a legislative update on what we're hearing as far as independent study inside the Capitol and what next steps are.
Yeah, for sure. So we've been having a lot of conversations with the different stakeholders, both houses in the legislature and the administration. And I think we're starting to get some clarity in terms of where there are some opportunities to create some meaningful changes for the field, and then where there just is some real resistance. And so everything we've been hearing, and these are things that we've known, is that this is hotly politicized. That so much of this, in terms of vaccines to quarantines, in person, distance learning, these are all things that legislators have had to deal with within their districts for many months, and have been getting beat up on. And so, not to mention, it very much has led to the recall efforts. And so, you have a real reluctance to open the independent study box back open and to start unpacking that stuff. So what we've been hearing is a real commitment to the current design, the design that was implemented within AB 130. And so a number of the instructional requirements, the support requirements, these are things that the three parties are wedded to. And they kind of saw this as the best scenario, given that all three of these parties came into it in very different positions. So again, where we have been hearing some receptiveness to finding some solutions is on the staffing issue, the issues that were just described so well by Deb and by Ron, that we know districts throughout the state are facing. There have also been some real receptiveness to the public health issues that have been raised. And so happy to unpack those a little bit more here in a momentarily.
Yeah, Yvonne, kind of a segue to that piece in terms of, you're giving us kind of a reality check on, like, for our members, it might seem like this makes so much sense, right, in terms of some of these changes, yet sometimes the Sacramento world could be a little different in terms of the perspective. And I appreciate you gave kind of that context about why we're in the place that we're at. So given the opportunity that you say in some of those areas, the big question I would say, what can our folks do? Where do they go from here? What would be helpful? I've seen over the last couple of weeks, just as our folks are becoming a little bit more vocal. I know there's been some press on the issue, and it seems to have gotten some people's attention. So, just suggestions in terms of what our members who are really struggling with this right now, what more can they do?
Yeah, thank you, Edgar, for the question. We've seen so many examples of the fact that advocacy makes a difference, not only in this specific scenario, but just over the past year and a half. So do know that your voice does matter and that it does have impact. We hear these citations all the time in meetings that we're in where legislators talk about these conversations that they've been having locally. So we're coming up on the deadline. The legislature will break for its interim recess next Friday, September 10th. And so we've been told that the legislature needs to get language, statutory changes language into its legislative council by this Friday. So that's the deadline we're dealing with. And so there's a real urgency to make sure that policymakers are hearing and that they're hearing now. So in terms of the opportunities, again, staffing is one. So any real solutions, any solutions that you can put forth that would have a meaningful impact on your district, let them know. Some of the ones that we've been hearing from you all and that we've been advocating for are some changes related to CalSTRS, specifically raising the post-retirement earnings limit. And so we've been advocating for that, and there's some exploration that's currently taking place. The substitute issue, extending the length of time in which substitutes can serve in the classroom. These are efforts where, again, there are folks looking into this and taking these things very serious. So if there are others that you have in mind, contracting out for specific services is another example that we've gotten from the field and we've been advocating for. Utilizing candidates and teacher prep programs and being able to hire them as substitutes is another one. So make sure that they're hearing and that they're hearing specifics, but that you're asking your legislator to communicate on your behalf, on your parents and students' behalf to leadership. The leadership of both houses needs to be hearing this from their caucus members. So again, making them aware, but making the request that they inform leadership of the houses, because it's ultimately going to be a select number of legislators who are making these final decisions, and those members are the leadership within both houses.
Yvonne, sorry.
Go ahead, Edgar. Go ahead.
I'm just trying to break the record of the longest half hour ever here. So let me ask one technical question of Yvonne while we got his attention, and this is taking a bit of a step back. So hopefully it's not too much in the weeds, but I think it was Gary Reller who asked kind of the distinction about AB 130 of like, is it designed to serve those kids who are quarantined, or was this really intended to be, big picture for those kids that are choosing to go virtual because they don't want, or their families don't want to return? So maybe just briefly, Yvonne, just because I know this has also been a point of contention even in our legislative discussions about what LEAs can or can't do in the practical reality. So any thoughts on that? As I know we got a similar question a couple times today.
No, the legislature and the administration made it very clear that the design was very intentional in terms of the independent study requirements that would apply, even for those that are quarantining for short-term IS, that the beefed up requirements, the adherence to grade level standards, access to coursework, that these things would apply, a collection of master contracts, that all this was intentional. So you will know that short-term IS, what doesn't apply is the synchronous and daily live and instructional requirements, the tiered re-engagement strategies. So those things were pulled out. But there is real concern from the legislators in terms of the perception of quality. And so if there are these real lengthy quarantines that extend beyond the 15 days, they want the beefed up requirements. So again, these requirements are very intentional. And so that's been very clear. The one thing that, going back and related to the quarantines, that I wanted to make sure to provide some clarity on, because this is really important, is there was also intentionality to allowing LEAs to be able to collect apportionment for students who are out on quarantine. And so we recognize, as do the policymakers, that this was unclear. And we heard from a lot from you all on this. And this is one of the areas that we've gotten a commitment that there's going to be some technical cleanup on this, and that it will be clear that LEAs will be able to collect apportionment for these students who are quarantining.
Yvonne has mentioned your opportunities to advocate, the messages that you need to talk to lawmakers about, and where the potential landing spots are for you to have an influence. We have on our website a Find Your Legislator button where you can type in your zip code or your city and find out who your lawmakers are and get contact information for them. I will have the team go ahead and put that link up on the screen. But just to give you an idea, if you're over on our website, go to that hamburger menu that's over on the left side, axa.org. Click that, click the Take Action link, which is over in the advocacy section. That will take you right to that spot where you can type in address, zip code, find out who your lawmakers are, and deliver those important messages about independent study. Yvonne, so good to have you on the show. Oh, go ahead, Edgar.
I'm going to ask one more question just since Yvonne's here. I think Kyle Stokes asked about special ed and the challenges around students with disabilities. Is this one of the issues that potentially the legislature is even looking at, considering as it relates to independent study?
Yes, it is an issue that's being considered and being talked about. So certainly there is legitimate concern as to whether or not FAPE requirements can be met for students with IEPs in an independent study model. But recognition of the immense pressure that the field is getting by some parents to move to an independent study option. And so this is part of the conversation. This has been part of our talking points as well. Dr. Aaron Simon has really taken the lead on this and communicating. But yeah, this is part of it. And we're part of a broader coalition that has put forth some potential amendments for the administration, the legislature to consider as well.
Hey, a big shout out to great reporter over at KPCC, the NPR station in Los Angeles. That's Kyle Stokes, who jumped in there to the chat. So Kyle, welcome. Hope you got what you needed. All right, now we're done with you, Yvonne. We've had enough of you. Edgar is not going to interrupt this time. Yvonne, good to have you here on the show. Have a great rest of the day.
Thank you too.
All right, Edgar, we have had one incredible show today. We have had great audience interaction. We have also had an earthquake in the middle of the show. I am getting word from our crack staff behind the scenes that the earthquake that was felt about 2 miles away from where Deborah was a 3-point something. Edgar, we've done a lot on this show. Never had an earthquake.
First earthquake seems fitting, right? We talk about wildfires. We're talking about all these other issues. It wouldn't be California without talking about an earthquake. So yeah, it's fitting. So hopefully everybody is safe up there. Sounds like it was minor, but please, amongst everything else you're dealing with, please stay safe. Yeah,
absolutely. Don't forget, folks, make sure you advocate on behalf of independent study. Also, a reminder, we are back on the air tomorrow, our regularly scheduled live and interactive AXA Legislative Lunch Break, 1 p.m. here on AXA Facebook and AXA YouTube. Dr. Sohail Sood from the Safe Schools for All plan. He is the co-lead on Safe Schools for All. He will be here tomorrow. So will Edgar and I. We'll see if Edgar and I get to leave the building or if they just lock the doors and keep us here till tomorrow. Edgar, good seeing you, man.
I'll see you tomorrow.
See you tomorrow. All right, folks. Thank you so much for being with us today. We will see you tomorrow, 1 p.m. here on the Wednesday AXA Legislative Lunch Break. Have a great day.